4 centuries before Christ, the armies of Alexander the Great infused the Hellenistic culture as they swept across Asia Minor, North Africa, and into India. In the year 332 BC, Alexander set his eyes on the holy city of Jerusalem, and with little resistance, Israel became a suzerainty of King Alexander. For 150 years, Israel lived peacefully under the rule of the Greeks until 175 BC, when Antiochus IV began to rule. Upon his ascent to the throne, Antiochus IV gave himself the title Epiphanes, meaning God manifest. King Antiochus Epiphanes determined that the whole world would worship him, claiming he was the human form of the Greek god Zeus. Because of Israel's refusal to worship him, Antiochus Epiphanes persecuted Israel with devastating cruelty. He was the one Christ spoke about who set up the abomination of desolation in the temple at Jerusalem. During the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, the Maccabean heroes rescued the temple and for a short time achieved independence for the Jews. But as Daniel prophesied about the idol in chapter 2 of his book, the belly and thighs of bronze descended into the legs of iron. The kingdom of the Greeks gave way to the empire of Rome. And in 63 BC, Israel groaned under the weight of oppression once again. The people of God, Israel, though at this time dispersed throughout the known world, were still awaiting their Messiah to restore the Davidic kingdom to international power. Not only Israel's rabbis, but wise men who had the Old Testament prophecies available studied the scriptures just to discover that one by one, these prophecies were coming to fruition before their very eyes. The immortal characters of Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra mingled histories with Herod the Great. This king of Judea had a lifespan so long that he was the same Herod who heard of the birth of a new king from wise men who had traveled to Jerusalem from the east. Israel's anticipation of a great deliverer, the new Moses, grew. Those who had eyes to see looked up for that star to rise out of Jacob. Just as the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire, the stars aligned and Anno Domini arrived. The promised Messiah could not come, warned a prominent rabbi, unless Israel was ready to receive him. He circulated a prophecy among the people that the Messiah would only appear when Israel kept the Torah. God would accept that the people were sincere if they could keep 2 Sabbaths in a row. The sufferings and humiliation of Israel would be over when they, as a group, could keep just 2 Sabbaths in a row. Many Israelites believed the prophecy. They kept watch of themselves and their neighbors, for all Israel clearly understood that with the coming of the Messianic age, a new heaven and a new earth would begin. Therefore, Israel prayed that the holy Sabbath day not be broken. As Israel focused on keeping the Sabbath, in Bethlehem a babe was born. Emmanuel, the Savior, came quietly. All heaven rejoiced as they watched with anticipation to see Israel embrace its long-awaited Messiah. One Sabbath, all Israel's males had come to Jerusalem to celebrate an annual feast, when a young Nazarene slowly moved in the crowd at the pool of Bethesda. A great multitude of sick and blind, lame and withered awaited an angel who would stir up the water and heal the first who could descend into its ripples. When the Nazarene young man looked down, he saw a frail Israelite who had suffered under an infirmity for 38 years, who obviously could not get into the waters in time to be healed. The man, Jesus, commanded the invalid to take up his bed and walk, and he did. When the Jews reacted with fury over Jesus' miracle, they would rather their brother be left crippled than break the Sabbath by taking up the mat he was lying on. Indeed, it is probable that some of the crowd there were hyper-aware of any Sabbath breaking because of the prophecy of bringing in the Messiah. When the Jews questioned him, he responded, "My Father worketh until now, and I work." At this, the Jews plotted to kill him because by saying that both he and the Father worked on Sabbaths, Jesus was making himself equal to God. But we can imagine that many of the Jews would be furious because the Sabbath had been instituted as a rest day for God. Genesis 2:3. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because on that day he rested from all the work of creation that he had accomplished. God gave Israel the fourth commandment, which commands them to rest on the seventh day, because in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Exodus 20:8-11. The educated Jews saw what seemed like a blatant error from this poor young Nazarene. God rests every seventh day, and therefore we must rest every seventh day. It is God's rest. He does not work. How is it possible that Jesus did not contradict the holy writ of Genesis and the Ten Commandments? Yet Jesus stated that God, in fact, did not rest any day, but worked up until that moment. Perhaps God's rest at creation was supposed to be a forever rest. If you look at the actual text, it gives no morning nor evening, in fact, no boundaries to the seventh day of rest. Perhaps it was supposed to be an eternal rest for God as he handed the new world he had created over to Adam as his kingdom. It was now time for Adam to create with his wife Eve. Is it possible that when Adam and Eve sinned, the eternal rest was forfeited, and even God himself began a new work of salvation for man that pointed to the time of Christ? Because of sin, God's rest was taken away, and the eternal rest had been postponed until the kingdom of this world was restored to the new Adam, Christ. Another Sabbath, Jesus and his disciples walked through a cornfield, began plucking the grain and eating it. Some Pharisees saw this and admonished them, saying that it was unlawful to reap on Sabbath. Jesus responded with the story of David, when he and his men were hungry and ate the sacred, unleavened loaves kept in the holy place. These sacred loaves eaten only by the priest. Jesus reminded the Pharisees that priests profane the Sabbath and are without blame. But I tell you that there is here one greater than the temple, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The Apostle Mark records Jesus responding that the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath also. Jesus told Israel's leader that not only did God and he work on Sabbath, but that the Sabbath was not made for God. The Sabbath was made for man. This turned the day upside down and inside out for the Jews. They had kept the day because they believed it was God's rest day. It was far more important than a human. It was worth martyrdom over the day. Hadn't Israel's saints given their lives rather than break even the tiniest infraction of the sacred Sabbath day? And here was this man from Galilee stripping the Sabbath of its preeminence and significance. Was this merely a day for man? Heresy and a blasphemy. The early church fathers saw a great significance in the meaning of this parable placed in the Bible. At least some of the early church were taught that this grain field symbolized the world ready to be harvested by the apostles. Walking through it and harvesting the grain on Sabbath meant that Jesus was now opening up the law and providing the real spiritual rest for the entire world, resting from the old covenant law. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? Jesus passed a man with a withered hand in the synagogue. He was aware that the Jewish leaders were hatching a plot to catch him in an act that would allow them to stone him, yet he would not leave the man unhealed. What man shall there be among you that hath one sheep, and if the same fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not take hold on it and lift it up? How much better is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do a good deed on the Sabbath days. Jesus said to the man, "Stretch forth thy hand." And Jesus restored to health even as the other. When Jesus encountered a beggar who had been blind since birth, he anointed the blind man's eyes with a compound of clay and his spittle. He told him to go wash in the pool of Shiloh. When the blind man obeyed Jesus, he was healed. After the healing, he was recognized as the blind beggar. Since this was a Sabbath, people began to tell of the miracle, causing the Pharisees to believe Jesus and the beggar had broken the Sabbath. They took the formerly blind man to the synagogue to stand before the leaders. Some of the Pharisees claimed that the man who performed the miracle could not possibly be of God because he broke the Sabbath by healing him. They called Jesus a sinner for healing on the Sabbath. The leaders contemptuously spoke to the healed man about Jesus. "Be thou his disciple? But we are the disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as to this man, we know not from whence he is." Jesus was teaching in the synagogue on their Sabbath when a woman arrived who, for 18 years, had a bent back so far she could not look up. Jesus called to her, "Woman, thou art delivered from thy infirmity," laid his hands upon her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. The ruler of the synagogue was angry Christ had done this on the Sabbath and scolded him in front of the multitude. 6 days there are wherein you ought to work. In them therefore come and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. The Lord answering him, Ye hypocrites, doth not every one of you on the Sabbath day loose his ox or his ass from the manger, and lead them to the water? And ought not this daughter of Abraham, whom Satan hath bound, lo, these 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day? The Jews were watching Jesus carefully. This man, who was followed as if he were an educated rabbi, after 3 years of his teaching, this Jewish carpenter, had sowed enough rebellion and Sabbath breaking. Jesus' betrayal was being designed by those who despised him. One final public Sabbath offense was arranged in a Pharisee's home. A man with dropsy entered. Jesus searched the eyes of the lawyers and Pharisees watching him. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? Jesus healed the man and sent him away. Which of you shall have an ass or an ox fall into a pit and will not immediately draw him out on the Sabbath day? And they could not answer him to these things. Hello, I'm Arthur Beem, and this is my wife, Teresa. Can you believe all those amazing things Christ did? All those miracles Christ did? And I'm sure we only get the tip of the iceberg, not even the tip. We get very little, but there's probably hundreds of these instances in his real history that just weren't documented. But these are amazing. Don't you find it interesting that Christ is being constantly criticized for breaking the Sabbath? And it's usually for healing people.
Yeah.
That as a kid, that just always blew my mind. What are you mad at Christ for? He's healing these poor people. It happens to be Saturday. It just blew my mind, and it was just sad. So, who's there? The Pharisees and the Sadducees. These are the highly trained, theological. They knew all these laws, but like the back of their hands. So when they're throwing these theological darts, if you will, at Christ, saying you broke the Sabbath, it's not because now they may feel some, hey, you're taking away our power, but in the beginning they didn't feel that way because they weren't scared of Christ. They didn't even know who he was. He was just some kid, some carpenter kid from some backwater town. So they weren't threatened by him yet. So they were actually keeping the law that was supposed to be kept, at least in their minds.
And remember, they were thinking that just two Sabbaths in a row, and the Messiah was going to come. So they were probably being more strict than normal during those times. But they had the right to arrest someone and bring him before the Sanhedrin for breaking the Sabbath. That's what they were supposed to do. Remember, as a community, you pick up a stone and you kill somebody.
And as a kid, I always thought, why doesn't he say anything? There's a few times he says something back to them or rebukes them, but in general, he doesn't refute the fact that he's breaking the Sabbath. Now, there's the time where he says, the Sabbath is made for man, man is not made for the Sabbath. But what about all the other times? And I've thought about this. Ever since I was a kid, I've thought about this. Well, God could have healed them at that time the way he heals us today. He's not present. You know what I'm saying? He could have healed them from a distance, so no one would know how it happened, or he would just Sabbath, and this man, like at the man at the pool of Bethesda, he could have just sent the power to heal him, and he could have stood up. He could have just thought, I'm going to heal this man, and the man all of a sudden stands up and walks.
No, but he didn't do that.
But he didn't, yes.
Yeah, he could have done it any other day.
Fascinating.
But when Jesus did this, it was very purposefully for a point. This didn't just accidentally happen.
That's right.
He didn't go to the pool of Bethesda and just go, I'm just going to go look around and sit down in the Sabbath afternoon by the pool. It was purposeful. He knew why he was going there.
Right. What else do you notice? I didn't notice this at first. But as I would read through the Bible, it finally started to dawn on me, well, why didn't Jesus break other rules or laws? Why didn't he steal something? Why didn't he marry 2 women? Why didn't he worship other gods?
And we don't know that he broke the Sabbath. There's nothing in the Bible that
I'm not saying he did or didn't.
But what I'm saying, but the point is, even if he wouldn't have broken it, we're supposed to avoid even the appearance.
That's right.
Of sin.
That's right.
So
That's right.
He was constantly appearing to have broken the
Well,
Sabbath.
this looks does this not look purposeful?
Well,
and I'm not saying Christ purposely was goading people in a negative, mean way.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can't say that he didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah.
He purposefully did these things on Saturday in front of them, because he obviously would have known they were going to be there. He didn't go hide in a back alley and do it. He did it out in the open.
Right. Well, you brought up a point that I interrupted you. I'm sorry, but you were talking about how he could have chosen to have seen to be breaking another commandment. You know, Jesus did not appear to be breaking the another commandment, such as idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't.
There wasn't ever a question. Nobody ever questioned whether he was breaking any other commandments, as far as we know.
Right. You know, he didn't come close to adultery.
No.
He didn't come close to stealing or killing.
Right. Jesus seems to have purposefully offended the Sadducees and Pharisees. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think there's malice in his heart, like when we say, I'm going to go and I'm going to purposefully punch the hole in the guy's tires next door because he's parking in my parking space.
Right.
It's not vindictive, but he obviously did it on purpose.
Yeah.
It was in front of everybody. Right. It was in front of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And like I said, he didn't hide in some back alley to do it. This is out in the open. This is on the stage, grand stage of everything.
How would that be taken today if you were going to offend somebody?
Oh my goodness.
I mean,
they would take it personally, like a personal slight to them.
And the greatest sin today is to offend somebody. And so Christ sure had no problem with offending the Jews on the Sabbath.
Right. That's right.
So, but what Jesus did, reply to them. Okay, so we're specifically speaking about when Christ was walking through the wheat field or the grain field with his apostles, and they all started eating. This specific time, Jesus responded with, he said, look, King David would go eat the showbread that was only legal for the priest to eat, and he was not a priest. Now, we look back on him and we say, well, he was a priest and king, but at that time they didn't really see it that way. So when Jesus said, you know, I'm like King David, and I can go into the holy place and get the showbread and eat it and distribute it to my friends and fellow the people
disciples,
that were going with him.
Apostles.
Well, David didn't have disciples, but it was
his soldiers, right?
Yeah,
his soldiers with him. Yeah.
And so, and I didn't offend God, and that's what he said. That was Jesus' excuse. He says, "I'm not breaking the law," because he is equating himself with King David. Now that would have been interesting, because that would have perked their ears up, because this Messiah was in the same lineage as King David.
Yeah, that was one of the titles of Christ.
Right.
Son of David.
For him to take that as his, using King David is kind of interesting.
That's right.
And anyway, so that's basically what he was saying, is that he can't break the Sabbath.
So the early theologians, the fathers of the church, They said Jesus couldn't break the Sabbath.
Yeah, they agreed.
They agreed.
With Jesus.
Surprise! They agreed with Jesus. He couldn't break the Sabbath. He's above the Sabbath. Father Ambrose, Father Chrysostom, Father Bede, Father Augustine, and Cyril of Alexandria, and there are others who make this statement that he couldn't break the law.
So these guys that we just listed off, these were the church leaders, the bishops and theologians of the first 500 years of Christianity. And they are the ones that helped us decide what books were in the Bible. They were the ones that said, oh no, this was written by Matthew, this was written by Luke. So they held a great amount of authority to teach God's word, during that time. Let's see.
So maybe these fathers that we just said and others, they understood that Sabbath, it was a different kind of commandment. It was different than the other 10. The Sabbath had a meaning. It was a prophecy.
Yeah.
So Jesus purposefully chose the Sabbath to create this clash. The Sabbath laws and his authority. There was a clash between his authority and the Sabbath laws.
Right. He set it up that way. He would never have set up idolatry to clash against him.
Right.
In other words, he wouldn't have taken stealing, but this was a setup.
Yeah.
You don't want to use the word Christ set people up, but it was a clashing. He created
it was a clear living version of I am the truth, the way, and the light.
Right. Yeah.
Lived out right in front of the whole entire community.
Right.
So as we look back through Christ, what you would call Christ's work, Christ's beginning of his ministry and the work that he's doing, we come to the point where Christ says, my Father has been working until now. He says, my Father's been working until now, and I have been working. If
you need to rewind the video, we're commenting on the things that we used in that, in the video before. And so it was early in his ministry when Christ responded to the Pharisees. They were getting upset over, what his healing on the Sabbath. And, that's what they said. He responded with, look, my Father's been working and I've been working.
Yeah, Israel adamantly, or we can say the Sadducees and Pharisees and a lot of the people, but Israel objected. They objected and said that God said he rested. Sabbath rest for Israel was keeping the day God rested.
Yeah, if you go back to what God said at creation, he said, that because he ceased from working, he finished working and created, he said, I sanctify this day and made it holy because on this day God rested. And then you fast forward to the 10 Commandments, and it says, remember the Sabbath day. And they said, it's because in 6 days God created the heavens and earth, and then he rested. So those 2 commandments were so important to Israel. And here's Christ coming in saying, excuse me, my Father has been working until now, and I'm working. Now, first of all, imagine what that would have sounded like. He sounded like he was making himself out to be equal to God or God's Son, because he said, my Father's been working on Sabbath, and so have I been working on Sabbath. I mean, we're not even going to deal with that, but that alone would have been considered blasphemous.
Sabbath wasn't supposed to be a single day. It wasn't supposed to just be God, when he said, this is I'm ceasing, is really the actual term. He rested. Well, it's actually he ceased from his work.
Right.
His labor, right? It was never supposed to be just a single day, and then the rest of the 6 you just didn't remember it. You're only going to have to remember it that one day, just okay. And it never was supposed to be. This was supposed to be longer than that.
Yeah. Are you talking about? I'm trying to understand what you're talking about. Are you talking about at creation? The Sabbath day was supposed to be.
Yeah, in creation, the right.
Okay, so God ceased from His creation, and that day, and we've done videos about this topic before. Just go back and look, but on our YouTube channel, because we've talked about this before. But the Sabbath day in the creation story was not confined with a morning and evening. It was only one of the 7 days, and so the Sabbath rest was supposed to be an eternal rest. And like you said, it was not a rest. God
wasn't tired.
Right.
He's like, whew, wow, I gotta take a rest.
Right. It just the word that they used, or that was chosen to be used, in God's infallible, inerrant Word of God, he used the word that could mean ceasing. It was a ceasing on that day. He ceased in His creation project of the heavens and the earth. So now this right here we are going to be talking about is just us talking together. There's what we try to do is not just bring our opinion, but bring the authorities and the theologians. Right. But we've been talking about this because this doesn't make any sense. God rested on the 7th day. Then they were supposed to remember that God rested on the 7th day, and that was in the Old Testament. Now we come to the New Testament, and Christ says, "No, God and I have been working this whole time."
Why would He make this statement? That's a really bizarre statement for Christ, the Son of God, to say.
Well, first of all, they could easily say, "Well, then we know you're not God." Because we've been keeping the Sabbath all these years.
Right. I
because
thought you were
God's
resting.
day of rest.
Right. That's right.
It's God's day of rest. That's what the Torah tells us. And so for Christ to come and say we've been working, that alone would have caused them just to blow their heads off.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Right.
How dare you? We're keeping, because they believed that they were being like God, and that God kept the 7th day holy in heaven. And they reflected that on earth as Israel, God's people. And so, why would God do that? Why would Christ now come and say, "I'm sorry, my Father's been working, and I've been working up until now"? Okay, we've been discussing this back and forth, and we have a proposition to make. This is not what the Catholic Church teaches. This is not what the Seventh-day Adventist Church teaches. This is not what the Calvinist teaches. But we've been banding it back and forth. And what if the ceasing of God at creation was He was ceasing His part of the creation? He created all this for Adam and Eve. It was their kingdom. So on Sabbath, it was the inauguration of giving over to the king and queen, Adam and Eve, what He had done for them, and says, "I'm now done. You are made in my image. You were made to create. Go forth and have babies. Go forth and subdue the earth. Be
fruitful and multiply. Subdue the earth.
Subdue the earth.
That's
have authority over it."
That's right.
So now, in a sense, His ceasing was the inauguration of now Adam and Eve stepping up into their positions.
I've created. Now I'm turning this over to you, the Prince of the Earth. Now you create.
Here is your kingdom.
Here's your kingdom. Subdue it.
That's right. And so the creation process was handed over to Adam and Eve. And so this rest that was brought on by the 7th day, the eternal rest, was God's eternally resting from His creation, but He was giving Adam and Eve a type of rest. In other words, the creation of the world was not really God working. The creative that's part of life. That's part of being like God. And so, in a sense, he wasn't creating a rest for them. But, okay, now this is what's interesting. Okay, what happened after Adam and Eve sinned? What did God, we don't want to say the punishment, but the discipline.
He says, now you're going to have to work.
Right.
Yep.
You lost your rest. Now Adam was supposed to.
What rest did he lose?
Well, he lost that rest that God had instilled.
That's right.
Right. And so Adam then was made to till the ground, and that was now he had to work. He lost that rest, and so did Eve. Now Eve had to bring forth her. In other words, the creation wasn't going to be easy. Before, they would have created like God in a type of rest, in a type of wonderful creation. Whereas now, they were to toil. They lost, Adam and Eve lost with their sin, their kingdom. It was actually handed over to Satan. And now, they lost the eternal rest that was provided for them. And so, when Israel, I'm sorry, you can talk to me.
No, go ahead. Finish the thought.
Wait, so when Israel was given the 10 Commandments, they were not bringing back that rest. There's no way they could bring back the rest that was given at creation. Adam lost that rest.
Adam had lost it, yeah.
So when he said, remember the Sabbath day, it was to remember what they had lost. Because something better was coming. So
when we think about when he says, my Father has been working and so have I been working. And he says, my Father has been working until now. So that very much is stating he never stopped working.
Right.
God the Father, Christ, the Holy Spirit, when Adam sinned and he had to start toiling the ground, the whole foundation of the earth was planned for Christ. The only way was for Christ to be you've heard of him being called the new Adam.
Yeah.
Why do you think he's called new Adam?
Right.
Because he could reclaim this rest.
Right. He could Satan had taken away the kingdom of God from Adam and Eve, the rightful. But Adam and Eve could not come back and get it again. Christ had to be the one who would come in, and salvation history began when Adam and Eve sinned. And so, in a sense, God no longer could rest. He was now involved again in the rescuing.
Right.
So when Christ said that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, we can also look at that and say, okay, the Adventist Church always taught us that the Sabbath was God's Sabbath.
Right, like he needed a rest. Yeah.
And so we go back to this whole thing when Christ said to the Pharisees, hey, my Father and I have been working ever since the beginning, up until now. And then he said, well, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. That took the Sabbath out of the realm of it being the day God rested on.
Right.
In other words, God wasn't up in heaven resting on the Sabbath anymore.
That's right.
Or the way that we were taught.
Right.
And the Jews were taught. You know, they thought that the Sabbath was far above anything for man. You know, it was high up there because that was what was happening in heaven. Heaven rested on Sabbath. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when we were young, that's what they taught Seventh-day Adventist kids, was that all heaven rested. You know, that we're going to be continuing the Sabbath keeping all the way through forever because it's God's Sabbath. Well, so now here's Christ saying the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And my Father and I have been working up until now.
So basically, the Jews what the Jews were keeping, they were keeping the original broken Sabbath that when Adam sinned and the rest was broken.
Right.
That's what they're keeping, is this
It was
broken.
a symbol.
It was a symbol.
Yeah, it was a symbol of what had been at creation.
It was supposed to be
eternal
forever.
rest.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
The eternal rest of Christ ceasing and man taking over. And
it was like saying we were supposed to have an eternal rest, and now we don't.
Yeah, and so man,
because we're having to toil and sweat
and so 6 days,
starve and everything else.
6 days we had to live off or live the curse of man.
Right.
Or, well, I know man wasn't cursed; it was the ground, but the ground was cursed, and so 6 days of the week we are always living that curse. And then on the Sabbath, they were reminded of what was always supposed to be.
It's like God said, I'm giving you a day out of 6 to remember the loss of this eternal rest that you had, and you can look forward to through Christ.
And so let's bring it all together. So Christ was saying to the Pharisees, basically, that the Father had not been resting this entire time, and that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, that this was no longer the institution God had at creation. Right. It was no longer that.
So we can see why they were kind of ticked off at Christ.
Oh, of course. Yeah. They were horrified. The Sabbath was of supreme importance, just like it is to Adventists today. And Christ was saying, we lost that Sabbath. And now I'm working. And the Sabbath that was created at Sinai was for man and not man for the Sabbath. And so the new Adam was coming. God had not given up on the original Sabbath. It was coming. But it was going to happen. The eternal rest that was going to be reestablished, that was provided for us and for God at the beginning, was going to be fought for. And Christ was the one who was going to win it back for us. And when he said, it is finished, he got it back. On the cross, he got it back.
Okay, so now if that doesn't blow your mind, this really blew my mind when we started to talk about it and think about it, that Christ came to the Pharisees and Sadducees and said, hey, your cattle are more important than the Sabbath.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, you talk about them wanting to throw him off a cliff.
Yeah, there was a couple times if you go back again.
And so I'm just quoting, I'm talking about the story of what he said. If you have an animal that falls in a ditch, don't you go get it? Because technically it's breaking the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Technically it is breaking the Sabbath. And he's telling him, no, you get that animal out of that ditch.
Yeah, and
life came before the Sabbath.
The Jews today, if you go to them, they will say the Torah, when they go back to the writings of the Torah, it says the law is to give life. Choose this day, because the Torah gives life, and breaking the Torah will give death. And so you are never to use the Torah to bring death to anything. In other words, even animals' lives are more important.
Right. You think about the story when Christ says, you hang all these things around, these yokes, these heavy weights around the necks of the people that you don't even do yourselves.
Yeah.
But he still told them, these are your lawful, legitimate authorities.
Right.
But the Pharisees and the Sadducees, when it came to the Sabbath, that was it. That was the pinnacle of all things, and you had to keep it 100%.
They reversed the whole point.
Right.
The Torah was supposed to bring life.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't use the Torah. Now, the Jews today will explain this, and I love the way they explain it. They said, okay, life is the point. Life is greater than the Sabbath. And see, the Jews grappled with this. we saw this even in our last video. The Jews were grappling with where does this, if it's God's Sabbath, then what do? Obviously, we're not supposed to intentionally break the Sabbath, or you're going to be stoned. So that was very, very important. But it was different when a pagan a pagan power would come and take over. That the Jews would. What was the strategy? Remember, you were talking about the Maccabees last time, that they were purposefully targeting the Israel
during
on
this.
Sabbath.
Yeah, during the time of the Maccabees, we talked about this and told this whole story about the Maccabees. How the Maccabees, they were so rigid in this that when that Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown, basically they just would sit down, lay their swords down, and let themselves be slaughtered.
Right.
And I told the story of them running into the wilderness, which actually is probably breaking the Sabbath too.
Well,
but they ran
right.
and hid in a cave. Well, the soldiers didn't even try to fight them. They just built a fire in front of the cave, sucked all the oxygen out, and killed them with smoke.
Yeah.
1,000 or more were killed just like that. And then there's another story during the Maccabean era of a woman who had 7 sons, and it wasn't about the Sabbath, but it was about eating pork.
Yeah, breaking the law.
Breaking the law is part of the law. And they'd bring one of the sons up and say, all you have to do is take a teeny little bite of pork, and the son would deny it and killed them, slaughtered them, and slaughtered them all, and finally slaughtered the mother because they would not eat the pork.
Right. Well, okay. During this time, there was a miraculous vision given the high priest, where a prophet Jeremiah came to him, or I don't know, but anyway, it was supposedly from God, saying, "Take up arms. The Sabbath is supposed to be." For life, to help your life be better, and if you just are being slaughtered,
and he said, "You fight back."
Yeah, fight back. And so, the Jews today still believe this, that we don't intentionally break the Sabbath, but you do not become a martyr for the Sabbath. You don't never martyr oneself for something that was supposed to bring life.
That's right.
And
you bring life, not death.
That's right. And so I think this is very interesting for Adventists to understand that the Sabbath was given to man, for man, and that even the Jews today will say that you are, if a pagan or antichrist, maybe we just should say it that way, the whore of Babylon, the whore of Babylon, or 666, or the mark of the beast, or whatever, God would never expect us to allow ourselves to be martyred for keeping the Sabbath. At least that's what the Jews today believe and teach. And if you look back on what Christ said to the Sadducees and Pharisees, it backs this up. Don't even let an animal die. An animal's life is to be protected, even over keeping the Sabbath.
Yeah, that's the death knell of it right there, as far as I'm concerned, is that Christ is talking. It's not like he's a doggy lover or a kitty lover. I mean, he created them. But what I'm saying is he's not this, tambourine banging Greenpeace person just because of animals. He's just saying how precious life is.
Yeah, you slaughter animals to eat.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Notice he didn't have vegetables on a fire for the disciples on the edge of the Sea of Galilee.
Right.
He had fish on a right, and his whole entire ministry was about life.
Right.
Saving our souls and life.
Yeah, and so I guess we're finished, but we want to end with just asking people to think about what we've said, the whole process of God refuting, or Jesus refuting the idea that God kept the Sabbath in heaven, and that He had been working, and He'd been working for our salvation up until then, up until the time of Christ, and that the Sabbath was made for man, and not
man for the Sabbath.
Not man for the Sabbath. Anyway,
Yeah.
I think that was all we were going to say, right?
I think so. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you that are in other countries watching us.
Oh yeah, Brazil. Hi.
Thank
Hi,
you, Brazil. Thank you very much. And there's a lot more coming. And please keep the emails coming. Let us know how everything's going. God bless you, and we will see you on the next video. Thanks.
Part 2, actually.
Part 2 of this. That's
Part
right.
2 of this is coming, because it's still going to be Jesus and the Sabbath in the next one.
That's right.
Okay, God bless.
God bless. Fear not.